I wasn't trying to like tune him or anything. And then just boom, just like threw his elbow, tried to spin and face me as hard as he could and smashed me right in the nose and broke my nose. And I actually had to reset my nose.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Delbra.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Today, I have with me Dr. Kickass, Mike Piekarski. Welcome to the show, Mike.
How's it going, man? How's your day going?
Very good. Thank you very much. Guys, before we get into it, please like, share, subscribe, leave comments, leave a review whenever you can. Really helps the show. If you want to support the show, check out the links at the bottom, and I really appreciate all of your support. So, Dr. Kickass, who are you?
So my name's Mike Piekarski. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. So in the U.S., we call it a physical therapy versus everywhere else in the world, it's a physio or physiotherapist. I don't know if in Canada you guys need an advanced degree or it's just a bachelor's. But in the U.S., now it's a doctor of physical therapy degree. I'm a board certified orthopedic clinical specialist, which just means a little bit better at dealing with musculoskeletal stuff, which is the type of stuff we deal with in jiu-jitsu. And I'm also a black belt in jiu-jitsu.
So you're quite learned. You're up on your book learnings.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, I had questions for you about being a physiotherapist and also obviously being a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Before we get into those questions, where do you train? Who is your professor? How long have you trained for? Questions like that.
Sure, yeah. So I live in Eastern Washington currently. I'm training with a guy named Nikolai Curry, V7. It's a small gym, but I've trained like all over the country because I'm originally from upstate New York, and then I went to PT school. I moved and I trained with the Vamos brothers in Long Island, and then I trained with Henry Akins in LA. So I got my black belt for Henry Akins.
Oh, nice.
And then I moved to Sacramento, so I trained at Uriah Faber's gym for a while, and then I trained with my friend Chad Bingham. He's the husband of Sarah McMahon, so I trained there while I was in Sacramento, and then I moved to Eastern Washington. So I've been training all over. I've trained with a lot of different people.
Very cool. What caused you to move around so much? Was it to do your schooling, or what was just wanted to get around?
Well, so I moved to Long Island for physical therapy school, and then my wife, she's from LA, so we moved there. And then, so my wife, she went to vet school in Northern California, and then we moved to Eastern Washington because she's doing an advanced, she's doing her residency. So that's why we keep moving around.
Nice. How do you like Washington? I guess you're like right below me then in Vancouver, eh?
Yeah, I think I'm like a 7-hour drive from Vancouver. Good things and bad things. I'm trying to get used to dealing with winter again. It's kind of rough. California ruined me. But other than that, I like Washington. It's very scenic. Me and my wife like hiking. Everyone where I live is just very nice versus like I grew up in New York where most people are jerks. So it's definitely a different vibe.
Yeah,
sure.
Washington is very much like BC, actually, both I would say politically and obviously geographically, just the layout, and like you said, it's very scenic, very beautiful part of North America. I wanted to know, how does being a physiotherapist kind of change the way that you approach jiu-jitsu, or does it change it at all? Like seeing it through the lens of obviously, you can sort of visualize catastrophic injuries, I think, on a more intuitive level than other people. Does it affect how you're training? Does it affect how you try and manipulate your partner's body or how you try to stay safe in training?
So that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because I did jiu-jitsu. I was a MMA fighter before I did any physical therapy. So like, I'm like a martial artist fighter first, like physio second, which a lot of times it's flipped. So I know a lot of physios that are a little bit more like worried about injuries, but I've like hurt everything in my body, and you can't necessarily prevent injuries, but it's how you approach these injuries so they don't accumulate, right? So like I get injured, but then I just rehab appropriately and I'm good to go. So so that is one thing where like I'm not scared that injuries are going to happen because I know they will. It's just you can't prevent them. From a martial arts standpoint, my physio knowledge actually helped me get a better understanding of both kinesiology, which is the study of human movement, and then the anatomy on like essentially how to break it. So if you think about it from a kinesiology standpoint, all sweeps and takedowns are just different ways to off balance. And when you understand that, you have your center of mass, and every time you move your center of mass outside of the base of support, they're off balance, which is essentially the precursor to sweeps and takedowns. So that concept like really helped me actually apply off balancing techniques. And then like the anatomy, like I remember like I'd been doing not takedowns, like footlocks since like white belt. When I started jiu-jitsu, it was like a college club where it was like the Wild West. People are just ripping heel hooks and nobody knew like what was going on. But so I've been doing leg locks for a long time, but like I never really understood like what I'm trying to do until I was like, after I went through anatomy and physiology, and then I went to I think I went to a Gary Tonin seminar, and then everything clicked. Like, oh, this is how you actually break the knee. Versus before I went to physiotherapy school, I was like so worried about heel hooks. Like essentially, I would cup the heel and be like, well, I can't apply any pressure because I don't want to hurt my opponent. But now that I understand jiu-jitsu, there's actually like there's a decent amount of force you need to do to break the knee. So you can't just, I'm worried about the knee going to break. Like you got to actually try to break the knee.
Right on. So, first of all, how old are you?
39.
Okay. And obviously as we get older, things heal slower. And injuries that might affect you worse now probably wouldn't affect you that bad when we're in your 20s. At least that's kind of been my experience.
Yeah.
When you roll in the gym, would you say that most of your injuries occur? Like what is the reason for most injuries? Would it be rolling with lower ranks or bigger guys or trying to do a move that you're not familiar with? Like what would you say is the cause of the majority of injuries in martial arts?
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to break it down a little bit so we have to think like in jiu-jitsu, what are the most common mechanisms of injury? So one, it's going to be a takedown. Two, it's going to be a joint lock. Three, it's going to be a positional scramble, which is going to be like the chaos between positions. And then there's going to be overuse stuff. So overuse is, like it just essentially, people overusing certain body parts, which it could, a lot of times it's not just a jiu-jitsu thing. It might be like a combination of jiu-jitsu and then strength and conditioning. And then like it's super common for people to overuse their elbows and they develop like elbow tendinopathy just because like they'll do like a lot of gi grips and then they switch to heavy barbell lifting. So like that is one overuse thing that we can consider. But if we want to break it down to more of like the traumatic injuries, so takedowns, joint locks, or positional scrambles, if we look at takedowns, I think a lot of the takedown injuries, if I had to say, it would be, and there's going to be traumatic injuries. People are going to do things right and just, shit happens. But like a lot of the times I would say is that the defender doesn't have great responses, right? Like, I've been training at all sorts of gyms. I've been training MMA gyms. There's so many jiu-jitsu gyms that put so little effort into takedowns. So what it means is essentially like I'm a black belt, but I'm not a black belt in takedowns. I think I'm a little bit better than a white belt, but a lot of jiu-jitsu guys are essentially takedown novice. So they just do bad things and people get hurt. If we want to then jump to like joint locks, generally the three joint lock injuries or the type of injuries I'm going to see from a joint lock is going to be one, ignorance. So that was the thing with leg locks for a while. Like people like just didn't understand leg locks. And then like you put them in a leg lock, and then those injury people just either they have bad defensive response or they don't respect it when they should. And then something happens. B, after ignorance is going to be ego. Like, so, you're a blue belt, you're rolling with we'll say you're a black belt, you're rolling with that blue belt who's a good footlocker and be like, I don't want to tap to a blue belt. So there's that ego element. And then there's also the lack of control. So like I remember like I've been doing leg locks for years, but like back in like early 2000s, because there wasn't this like intricate leg control, leg entanglements, essentially it's like you would reap and you're like, I have to break their leg before they spin out. You'd see all those people just spinning. So what happens is because there's no control, you have to put it on super, super fast. Versus now, I think like there's the control aspect of leg locks is considerably better. So like, you know, I could get someone in a good position and like I don't have to break their leg because I'm like, they're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'd mentioned earlier, like maybe sparring with white belts being a factor. I find that especially when someone's bigger than you and they don't have the best responses, you know, sometimes you roll with white belts and you're like, it just feels like you can't do anything that you want to do. And a lot of that is because they're not giving you a normal response that you would expect. You know, they're so new to the sport that they're doing kind of weird things. And a primary example, the other day, one of my students was rolling with a white belt and the white belt was stuck in side control and he was just getting absolutely mauled. But my guy was like mauling in a nice way, you know, like he was catching and releasing. And then all of a sudden this giant white belt tries to do like this bridging, basically like he grabbed his arm and just try and twist him as hard as he could and pop the guy's arm. And it was just like totally you know, not really a conventional thing that you would see at a high level jiu-jitsu match. My question to you is, being, you know, you're probably one of the senior ranks at your school where you train at. Do you train with white belts and like day one beginners? Do you train with everyone?
Yeah, I'll train with anybody. I guess. I mean, you know what it's like those white belts. I almost think like like an athletic white belt who doesn't know anything is actually more difficult to train with than a blue belt, just because a lot of like a low level blue belt, because essentially like the blue belt's trying to do things technically, they're playing the game, I'm just better at it, versus like the white belt, it's like playing poker with someone who doesn't know how to play poker. Like the advanced poker players like trying to bluff, but if like if you're going with someone who's completely novice to poker, like you can't play the game. It's just because they're just chaos, and I think white belts are just that chaos. They're just going to do shit that like you probably shouldn't do, and they don't know it's bad. Sometimes it might actually work, but but then we can think just because it's effective doesn't mean it's necessarily a good long-term strategy, because it might be like very energy inefficient, even if they technically succeeded at the moment. But like for me, like, I mean, that's the problem as a black belt. Like I pretty much have to roll with everybody, whether they're the white belt or they're like the 300-pound guy, like, and I'm 175. So rolling with those 300-pound guys is not always enjoyable, but like if I don't do it, then someone much smaller and less skilled is going to have to do it. So, you know, I'll man up and do it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Being a gym owner, I feel kind of obligated to roll with anyone that, you know, comes in and wants to sign up. Doesn't matter how big they are or whatever, their skill level. When you roll with like day one beginners, you know, and you feel like, okay, there could be a degree of danger here due to the lack of experience or the size of this beginner, how do you stay safe? Like, what are some pointers you would give to somebody in this situation who feels like they have to roll with somebody so new, but you need to take precautions to keep your body safe?
I mean, so I guess if I'm going with someone who's uncontrolled and spazzy, like I might not play a takedown game against them, just because like that's where a little bit more chaos can happen. And like, you know, these big people or these white belts have no idea what they're doing. So I might just pull guard and someone like them. And then I just play more of a control based game versus a movement based game, because I feel like the movement based game is where a little bit more of that chaos can happen, where those people who don't know what they're doing will thrive, versus if I just control them and just stop them from doing something. If they're day one white belt and I want to let them work, though, it's more of like it's a measured control, right? So it's just enough control where I can make sure that I can dictate where the roll goes, but I still let them do stuff. There are those people that come in, those like athletic. So where I train, there's 2 universities like within 5 miles. So there's a lot of college students. So now there's these like young kids with a lot of energy. So some of these people I have to essentially like shut down and make sure that they understand where they are in the totem pole. And then once they kind of like show that they're going to be a little bit more consistent with training, then I can kind of be nicer and let them work a little bit more.
Usually when I roll with white belts, I kind of, you were mentioning like a control based game. And I think that that's a very smart thing to do, because the responses can be so random compared to what we should be doing in jiu-jitsu, like, fighting back to inside position, managing distance, things like this. A lot of the time they can just like spaz in different directions. Like I remember when I was blue belt, I was rolling with a white belt and I was kind of behind him in like a chair sit position. I had passed the guard and I had a seat belt and I was thinking, okay, I'm just going to like take this guy's back. And I remember even going very, very relaxed. I wasn't trying to like tune him or anything. And then just boom, just like threw his elbow, tried to spin and face me as hard as he could and smashed me right in the nose and broke my nose. And I actually had to reset my nose because I was like, well, I either reset the nose now or I go to the hospital. And because I live in Canada, you're probably going to wait like 4 or 5 hours, maybe even longer before you see a doctor. And by that time, all the adrenaline would wear off and it would probably hurt a lot more. So I just did it myself. And that was kind of a learning lesson. And I feel like, I feel like a lot of the time when I get injured, it's almost like I learn something about what not to do, or I learn something about the game that, oh, okay, this caused an injury for me. I need to be more careful in this situation. I need to be more in control or whatever. And in that case, the lesson that I had learned was, when you're behind someone, put your head in a position that is not, it's not really accessible for my partner to, throw an elbow and smash me in the nose. So, I also find when I'm going against somebody bigger, I feel like my chances of certain submissions decrease because they're so much stronger. And especially if I let's say I pin a big guy, if I'm putting all my weight on him, then if he's big and strong, he could manipulate me and bridge into one direction and take me over, right? So I don't know, going against big guys sometimes, and tell me if you agree with this. When you're going against big guys, I don't hedge all my bets on submissions. I more so just try and control and kind of stay behind the defense because I feel like if I commit to, let's say I commit to like an arm bar or something, and now I'm getting stacked by this giant guy, or I try and put him in a triangle and he picks me up or stacks me. There's just there's a bigger degree of injury when you're working with a bigger body. So how do you like to approach training with bigger training partners and staying safe?
Yeah, I would say, perfect situation, how can we use our bodies against like where a bigger guy doesn't have the advantage? So attacking legs is always a good thing. I want to get to the back, but also depends because if a big guy understands how to use their weight, even if I'm on their back, so it's, if they can put their weight on me, like they still have advantage. So it kind of depends on the person. I generally would either say get mount or the back mount. But like you said, like I'm gonna like really control the position. I want to like really lock them down. And generally when I roll, like I'm more of a submission hunter. I'm trying to play more of the positional game, like getting better at like essentially shutting people down. But I would say against these big guys, like I'm not aggressively rolling for these subs. Like there's this guy I roll with now. He's a brown belt. I think he's like 280. So he's like quite a bit bigger than me. Jesus. And I learned the hard way. I'm not going to try to triangle him. It just
yeah.
And that's a move I like. And I was like, you know what? This is not worth it. But what I've also found that a lot of times with big guys, like they're good on top, but if you can put them on their back, they're like a turtle. Like and not every big guy is like that because a lot of big guys that will play bottom, but there's often where these big guys understand how to use their weight, but when they're on the bottom, they really can't, like their weight is no longer an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Especially if they're like big around the midsection and their guard retention is not the greatest. They struggle pulling their knees towards their core. Yeah. Then that would be a great way, like loose passing around the outside. A lot of these, I know big guys who they want you to try and get chest to chest so that you're connected to them so that they can do big bridging reversals. And it can be very difficult to stop a big dude from bridging if you're in mount or side or top half guard. I almost find sometimes with these big guys that I actually don't want to put my weight on them because it gives them the ability to manipulate my center mass. Whereas like if I kind of like play the distance game and as I pass their guard, they're trying to connect to me. I can just sort of press myself away and then come back in as needed so that I'm not loading all of my mass onto them. I want to talk about your personal injuries. People who listen to the show know that I have knee issues. I have a shoulder issue. What's the worst injury you've ever had well, ever really, but I assume jiu-jitsu would probably be the reason for said injury.
Actually, it was, well, my worst injury is only bad because it wasn't managed properly. So when I was like 14, I had what's called a patellar subluxation, so my kneecap would slide out of place. This had nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. I was doing this was before I did any martial arts. And it's one of those things where just shit happens. I had I have what's called a shallow trochlear groove, so I'm just more prone for these dislocations. So my knee dislocated a bunch. I tried to do rehab, but I was like 14 and not an athlete, so I like didn't take my rehab as seriously as I should have. So then they're like, all right, well, this isn't working. Let's do surgery. And at the time they did a surgery, what's called a lateral release, where the idea of what they thought was because some of the outside structures of the knee are pulling the kneecap, why don't we cut it to try to minimize that pull? Which what they'd found, I mean, this surgery was over 20 years ago, so medical knowledge is better. The outcome of the surgery is actually not great because it doesn't really reduce subluxations that much. And then because of it, now my one quad is significantly weaker because some of the attachments from one of the quad muscles isn't there. So I had to deal with that. The surgery didn't go super well. And then because of that, I would still get some subluxations. So I've had 2 loose body removals because every time the kneecap goes out of place, it scrapes away some of the cartilage. Mm-hmm. So I had this like bit of floating cartilage that would just lock my knee up.
Yeah.
So that was pretty terrible. So I've had 3 knee surgeries related to that. And because of that, I've pretty bad patellofemoral arthritis. So it's in my kneecap, not the actual knee joint. Like I'm technically what's called grade 4, which is bone on bone. But with what I know, like, even though that sounds bad, and whenever surgeons like look at the scan, they're like super concerned. Like if I was 15 years older, they probably would try to replace my knee. But based on how I'm presenting, I'm actually doing pretty good. And for the most part, I know what to do to not have knee pain. So I would say that's the worst one, just because of how much arthritis there is and how weak my quad is. But because a lot of this happened before I did jiu-jitsu, like I've been doing jiu-jitsu and fighting and wrestling. So like I've just developed these compensation patterns. So like if we rolled, you probably wouldn't know that my leg is weak, which is kind of nice. That's the worst one. Another bad one I have is I have a partial scaphoid lunate tear in my wrist. So I think it was when I was a white belt and I was watching YouTube videos and I was trying to do a scissor takedown. Thankfully I hurt myself and not my training partners. But as opposed to like getting to the position and then placing your leg down, essentially I just like fell on my wrist. And I think that was what started the wrist injury. And then it just got worse and worse over time. Now that could be a bad injury because the scaphoid is a bone in the wrist, and once it breaks, it doesn't have great healing potential. So a lot of times when people break their scaphoid, it actually the bone dies, and then you just need to take like the whole row of wrist bones out. So right now, with the scaphoid lunate tear, because of that, my wrist range of motion's not good, so I have to modify how I do things. Thankfully, it's not good for posting, but like I have a good range of motion if people are trying to like wrist lock me, thankfully. So, that would be terrible too. But those are like the 2 really bad injuries that essentially forced me to modify both my jiu-jitsu game and my like strength and conditioning.
And for someone who has a knee that's bone on bone, like I have cartilage issues. I've had 2 meniscus surgeries on my one knee. One was they removed some meniscus. The next surgery was they repaired it. And I have had some minor issues where it'll tweak, but nothing super, like it won't lock out right now. But I know that I'm running on less cartilage in that knee. In your case, where they say that it's like bone on bone, like what kind of a physio regimen do you run on that knee? How do you feel about like knees over toes type stuff? How do you strengthen that knee and keep it functional, even though it's bone on bone.
Well, okay, so we'll address we'll address this in two different ways. So we have the patellofemoral joint, which is where the kneecap articulates with the femur, and then we have like what most people think of as the knee, which is where the femur articulates with the tibia. So those are two different things. People with issues like me with patellofemoral issues, for the most part, if I can keep my quad loose so that my kneecap isn't like being aggressively pressed into the femur, that deloads it. And pretty much with my knee, the big thing that I don't do is I don't really do a lot of, like, if I do for a double leg, like I don't drop my knee to the ground on that leg anymore, just because I think that could have been something that are exacerbated over time. Like when I used to fight MMA, most people do double legs. So every time my knee's dropping down, it probably wasn't good for the longevity for my knee. But once I just stop doing that, for the most part, my knee's feeling pretty good. I try to strengthen my quad as much as possible because there's a pretty good correlation with having weak quadriceps and the development of arthritis. Now, because of the lateral release, I have a weak quad. So for me, clinically, I use something called blood flow restriction, which is a pretty cool tool. So mostly when people exercise, what they're doing is they're essentially mechanically tensioning the muscle so that it adapts and gets stronger. So blood flow restriction essentially is you use a specialized tourniquet when you work out. So as opposed to getting mechanical tension, we're doing like the adaptive response is based on metabolic. So essentially I can do exercises under a much lower load that my knee can tolerate. So you can get like a hypertrophy effect with like a 20 to 40% one rep max versus normally you need like 75% 1RM. So I can exercise on a much lower load that doesn't irritate the knee. And because when I do it with the tourniquet, I get this metabolic response. So there's very good evidence for hypertrophy. So that's something that's been beneficial for me. So again, that's how I manage my knee. To answer your second question, well, I'll jump to tibiofemoral. So then we're thinking the tibiofemoral joint. The knee bends and straightens, but also rotates. And that's one of the gripes I have with knees over toe. Well, I have a lot of gripes, but the biggest thing is he's a knee expert, but he doesn't actually address knee rotation. How do most meniscus knee injuries happen? They're a compression and a rotation. Where do a lot of injuries happen in jiu-jitsu? Well, you take like a heel hook. Well, a heel hook for the most part is a rotational movement. So for me, when I work with people clinically, like I do a lot of knee rotation movements. So how can we strengthen that? So for you, like let's say you have knee arthritis. If I can give your knee more degree of freedom so it can add rotation, you're not stressing those same points over and over and over again. I'm just giving that a little bit more space. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like a thing that I see in rehab, like people, when they do meniscus stuff, like they're just doing general strengthening, which isn't bad, but it's not specific to the meniscus. If you want to keep your knee healthy, rotational movements are super critical. To answer the next question about the knees over toes, I think the big thing with him is like, I think his program means well. I think it's really important to strengthen a full range of motion, which is something he proposes. I think it's really good to do single leg strengthening because most people, what they do is they just do like squats and deadlifts, which is a bilateral because it's both legs, sagittal plane motion. But I don't think that so adding unilateral exercises are important. My big issue with knees over toes is I don't think people understand where the phrase your knees shouldn't goes over your toe. So what happens is, let's say I'm descending into the squat. The lower that I go actually puts more stress on my patellofemoral joint. So usually it caps like 20 degrees from being parallel. That's where you have the most pressure on your knee. If your knees go over your toe, it puts even more stress. So like for me, because of what I do, even though I have patellofemoral arthritis, like I can still squat with my knees over toes and I'm okay. But there's a lot of people who haven't done all the prep work that I have that have a lot of pain. Ironically, the knees over toe guy, even though he talks about what he does, so he actually has a partial knee replacement. So he is an artificial kneecap because of arthritis in his kneecap. So there's a lot of stuff that he might not have been able to do if he didn't have that surgery. But obviously, because of marketing, he doesn't really talk about that. But so if, let's say, someone has a painful knee, I'm not necessarily going to be very aggressive about getting their knees over the toe, because if it hurts when your knees goes over your toe, that's where the phrase, well, okay, well, don't have your knees goes over toe. A healthy knee should be able to, but we want to bridge that gap. You don't just force the knee over and then just irritate the knee and make it painful. I mean, I've worked with a lot of clients that would try knees over toe, and then they would just aggravate their knee because they're just forcing their knee over the toe over and over and over again.
Aside from jiu-jitsu, first of all, like, can you tell us how many days a week you're training jiu-jitsu, and also how many days are you weightlifting / doing like prehabilitation physiotherapy type exercises? Just run us through your kind of your weekly schedule, what that might look like.
It's going to slightly change because last week at the gym that I'm training at, one of the instructors left, so now I'm teaching more. And my big thing, like if I teach, I also train. So I currently train 4 to 5 times a week. Because with this new addition, for a physical capacity standpoint, I'm actually trying to add more aerobic zone 2 training, just because prior to this, like I was I'd get about 4 days of training and that was all my body could really tolerate. But now that I'm teaching more, I'm trying to up that. So I'm trying to work my recovery via zone 2 cardio, so I can allow my body to get comfortable with that 5th day of training and or do more strength work. So I do a lot of functional range system training, which is like joint training. I do this stuff daily. So I do full body cars, which are essentially isolated joint movements, full body. And then depending on what I'm dealing, like if I have like some injuries, I might be focusing on them. Like right now I have a mild shoulder injury. So I'm kind of focusing my attention on that. But in a perfect world, I would be doing at least 1 day of like heavy strength training in addition to that. And then I would be probably sprinkling in this joint training like 2 to 3 times a week.
But you said every day you do cars.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain to people who might not know what that is? What are cars?
So a car is a controlled articular rotation. So essentially you're taking a joint through its full available range, but you're also going through each degree of freedom. So you take the shoulder, well, it's a very mobile joint. So it doesn't, most people associate the shoulder with just reaching up overhead, but I want to add these rotational movements. So full body, it could be neck, spine, shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, knee, ankle, etc. So I do that. So taking my joint through its full available range, it's almost like flossing for the joint.
Yeah.
You're just cleaning up all those cobwebs. Like, because you have to think, we talked about injuries, which for jiu-jitsu, and a lot of them are going to be these macro injuries, but we also could take micro injuries. Like, you know, you're a competitor. I'm sure like you don't tap instantly when people are applying things. There's going to be that wiggle room where, you know, like as a competitor, you might wait like a second. So there wasn't an injury, but you're still getting those joint capsules kind of stretched a little bit. So like, what's the long-term repercussion for this happening, right? So a lot of this stuff is okay. Like I didn't have a big injury, but if let's say I'm tapping just a little bit late to an armbar over like years, that's where you're going to see these black belts that like their elbow joints don't fully straighten anymore. Like that's super common just because of all of the trauma they've done. So I feel like a car, like I said, is just kind of like cleaning out the cobwebs so we can restore the range of motion and kind of minimize the, I guess, the regression of our joint health.
So I learned about cars a couple months ago, and I started doing them not every day, but I've been doing them. Do you find that if they're going to be effective, you have to do them daily? And I can't really perceive that they are improving anything. Is that normal?
Yeah. So one, you don't need to do them daily. Two, it's like a jiu-jitsu technique. There is no perfect car, but as you start doing them, you could be more mindful. Like maybe like I could watch you do a movement and like I can start saying, hey, these are some of the things that you can work on, different zones of things. A lot of times cars can be kind of a maintenance. So I do a lot of FRS concepts in addition to that to like expand my joint health. And then I further reinforce with cars. But like ways that you can make cars more beneficial, I can use it as like a kind of a, like I said, a joint health. I could do it as a warm up. So I incorporate some cars in all my jiu-jitsu classes now. I don't go too crazy with it because like if I do full body, that takes like 20 minutes. So I try to spend about 3 minutes on them. Like I'll pick a few body parts. But you can also, if you want to make them a little bit more effective, you can do like high levels of radiation. So I'm like full body tensioning. You can do like resisting. So certain movements will actually do a loaded car. So it kind of depends on what your goal is. It's super interesting because I've been like thinking about this. The reasons why I think cars are very beneficial is if you have to think from like a motor learning perspective, right? Like all of the, you can take like the environmental, you can take your personal constraints, right? Those personal constraints is kind of like the degree of freedom that your joint will allow. So if let's say you're working with someone who's really stiff and immobile, they have a much less variability in the way their joints can move versus when someone has better control of their whole body, their body will allow them to do things that someone else wouldn't, which is going to expand their ability to develop like a motor skill.
Cool. And with these cars, are you doing like, for any given joint, like 3 rotations each direction? Like so
it depends on your goal, right? So, I mean, if like sometimes what I'll tell people is I like your morning routine, it might be like 1 or 2 rotations in the morning, just so you can kind of get through everything. In a class, I might do 3. If I'm trying to have more of a training effect, sometimes I'll go to like a discomfort, like you're doing this like moderate level of irradiation or full body tensioning when you do it until you get discomfort. I mean, there's sometimes I might actually even do like a loaded car till failure. So I just keep doing it until, when I say failure, I say technical failure. So I'm not hitting each point every time. Okay, my joint can't handle anymore.
Mm-hmm. Is this ideal before or after training?
It could be both. Like, so I do it like pre-training just to kind of like get my joints ready. But then I can also do it after, especially if I want to minimize any type of like muscle soreness or like that repercussion of like tapping late, just to kind of just keep everything moving, especially if it's like one of those training sessions where I'm going hard and aggressive and, I might be the nail on those ones opposed to the hammer.
So everyone has their own warm up in terms of for class or competition. Let's use competition for example. I've zoomed through your Instagram. I've seen you've done competitions before. Everyone has their own ritual that they like to do before they warm up. Some people do like 50 burpees and all these calisthenics to get really hot. Some people like to roll with a teammate. Other people don't do anything. Other people stretch or maybe do cars. From your perspective and your experience and your professional opinion, what do you think is the ideal warm-up for a competition?
So the goal, what's the goal of a warm-up? The goal is obviously get your body temperature raised. You want to get any tissues that you're going to use a little bit more bendy, and you want to get the joints moving. So I would do cars initially, but then it's going to be focused on body temperature. So one of the favorite things I like doing is pummeling, because I don't need a partner who really knows what they're doing. It's a little bit more sport specific where I can start pummeling to just get my heart rate going. And then I can add some like various, entries from like a clinch. So I just kind of flow back and forth. I might focus on just kind of like warming up with certain techniques that are a little bit more applicable to something that I might be doing. But again, for jiu-jitsu, whether it's competition or class, it should be joint specific and then like sport specific, and then keeping the body temperature warm. So I'm working on this product currently, which we can talk about later, called the Mat Sanctuary. So it's kind of like for gym owners, like how you can keep your students healthy. And some of the stuff that I've talked about is stuff from that research. But what's interesting with a warm-up, and this is why like traditional classes are kind of like, I'm kind of going away from the traditional class after thinking about it, because people will do a warm-up, right? They do a good job, and then they just do their static drilling. So what they found was that after you start doing after the warm-up period, now your body's starting to cool down. Now, if there's like, anywhere from like 6 to 20 minutes after the warm-up, it's like you did no warm-up, right? So that's what makes competition hard is you could be waiting in that bullpen for like 3 hours, So it's kind of first you do warm up, and then what can you do to kind of maintain being warm? So this doesn't apply for a class, but like in a competition, that's where actually having, like a hoodie and like sweatpants is good. So you can at least maintain that. Obviously that doesn't work in a jiu-jitsu class because people are most likely not wearing a hoodie, but there should be a period of warm up and then either maintaining that warmth, or there has to be like a kind of like a re-warm up period. So like if let's say I was at a class where we did that static drilling, I might do like kind of like a lower intensity live round just to kind of get my body temperature warm before I go back and like do my full rolls.
Do you assess your own injuries, or do you have a physiotherapist that you see?
No, I handle myself. And it could be because I'm arrogant, but like I only want to work with someone who knows more than me, and I don't.
You don't know anyone like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that I would go for help, but none of them are close. So I handle things myself. But you also have to think about, like, I spent like hundreds of $1,000s on education. If like the only people I can help is like me and my wife, like it was worthwhile, even if I didn't make any money from what I'm doing.
But if you have like a knee injury, can you do a self-assessment? Like, would you be able to do the test without somebody like handling your knee and moving it? Or like, is it awkward to do a self-assessment for certain parts of your body?
Yeah, I mean, but like I might have someone. So there's various orthopedic tests you can see, like ligament laxity. I think that's what you're talking about. Like, I mean, I do know people I could have them do the test on me, but just to kind of get an idea. But that doesn't necessarily change from a treatment perspective, right? Like I'll kind of know if I'm not responding and it's something more serious where I need to get surgery. I've been pretty lucky. I haven't had any like really big injuries in that sense where I had to, but so to answer your question, I would have them do like those specific stuff. For the most part, when it comes to like the treatment perspective and the programming and the rehab, I would handle that myself.
How do you feel about it's a really popular topic these days, peptides? Do you think that they're effective? Would you recommend that people, like, I know you can't really give like a broad recommendation to everyone, but like, do you think that it's a good avenue to kind of do some research, and like, do you think there's validity to it as in terms of speeding up recovery?
So I think the biggest problem with peptides currently is there's like minimal research on humans. So there's just not a lot of research currently. Now that doesn't mean it's not beneficial. It just means that there's just not enough research for me to say one way or the other. A lot of the research has been done on rats, and even then it's not really that much. So it's still kind of like the Wild West. So that's for me, because there isn't research. I can't say for certain if it's helpful or not. We don't know what the long-term repercussions are. Like there could be some negative things involved that we don't know about. I do think they probably do something, but another benefit of doing research is understanding what structures respond well to it and what's the proper dosage. So like, it's funny because like I've worked with people, I've talked to people that took peptides. And, like one guy who's like, oh, I took peptides and they just randomly kind of injected himself. The big problem with that, though, is all these peptides theoretically would do, like a peptide or orthobiologic, like stem cells or PRP, would enhance the healing process. But like your body doesn't heal and go back to the way it was. All your body's doing is trying to connect the tissue and which creates this fibrotic scar tissue. It's like if you have a cut on your skin, like that scar tissue is weak, easily re-injured. How you get for a musculoskeletal injury, how you get those to kind of feel better is you have to appropriately stress it so it adapts to go back the way it was. So if you just take peptides and you don't do anything, that doesn't going to make you go back to the way it was. It just might not hurt anymore, but that doesn't mean that the tissue is going to be as resilient as it was pre-injury. So for me, clinically, I don't recommend it because I don't have enough research. The people who I have worked with who did use them, I didn't necessarily notice a big benefit. Now, that doesn't mean they're not helpful. I just haven't seen it.
If you had let's say you damaged a ligament, we could say sprain, we could say you fully ruptured something in your knee, would you consider taking peptides or would you not do it?
I guess it would depend. Like if like, let's say like my knee's fully ruptured, like peptides aren't going to do shit. Like it's not going to connect the dots. That's a good
No,
question.
let's say you needed to get surgery or something, and now you're recovering from surgery, and you know that you have like a road ahead of you. Would you supplement your recovery with peptides? Would you consider that?
I don't think a peptide would speed up the return to sport. So like for something like the ACL, there's a ton of research that return to sports 9+ months. I don't necessarily know if it would make it so I'd be back to full rolling any quicker. Because it would all be guesswork, I wouldn't take the chance. So at the moment, I would probably say no.
Fair enough. I guess you'd want more research before you would put something like that in your body. Have you ever had a client that you just couldn't help? Like you couldn't fix them, you couldn't help them get results that they wanted? And let's say that they were like following the protocol. They were trying, not like they were seeing you and then they wouldn't do what you told them to do. They were like trying and you just can't help them. Does that ever happen to you in your profession?
Yeah, I mean, like I've been PT for nine years, so I've worked with hundreds, probably thousands of people at this point. So like I don't have 100% success rate, but like no physio does. So sometimes it could be rehab is not the answer. That's why people have surgeries. That's why people might need orthobiologic, etc. It could be something where just people aren't going to respond to my approach. So, I have a certain bias on how I end rehab, but like no physical therapist does the same thing. Like there's all these different approaches. So it could be that either I misdiagnosed it or my treatment philosophy just didn't match what is required. Now, I told you I'm a board certified orthopedic clinical specialist. That just means I'm a nerd and I've gone through research. So I can kind of see like, what does research kind of say, how we can kind of approach managing different symptoms, different diagnosis, but this constantly evolves and changes. So, I mean, there are people that have not responded to what I did. And, it's one of those things too, where sometimes this is like a big flaw with a lot of physical therapists where I give people stuff and then, like so essentially book sessions, right? So afterwards, like, I don't know what happens. There are some people where I'm like, I don't know if I helped them or didn't, because if there's no follow-up, I don't know. So that's why a lot of times now I work with people. If I work with people virtually, I have people on this membership model so that I can stay in contact with them. So I'm actually make sure they're back to jiu-jitsu, or, as opposed to like giving them stuff and just say, good luck, I hope you get back.
What is some advice that you would give a client who just suffered like a catastrophic injury? And let's say they didn't get surgery. Maybe surgery would happen. Maybe it didn't happen. But let's just say the injury occurred like, a day or two ago. And they likely have, a road ahead before they return to sport. What is just any advice? It could be physical. It could be mental. Like, what would you tell that person?
First thing, go see a medical professional. And a lot of jiu-jitsu guys are a little too focused on what social media tells them. Like, don't do that. Go see someone who knows what they're talking about. Confirm what it is. And it could be something like, a lot of people like do get back to jiu-jitsu without an ACL. I don't necessarily know if it's a good way to go, but it's definitely an option. But can get the full diagnosis, talk to a medical professional. If you talk to a surgeon, it's a good idea to get multiple opinions, because just like, there are surgeons who fail, just like I failed certain patients. So you want to kind of make sure that multiple people agree. I've worked with clients, they go see a surgeon and they got 3 completely different diagnosis, which is, bizarre. So you want to get multiple opinions. When it comes back to training, take your rehab seriously. I know a lot of times jiu-jitsu people are trying to rush back. Sometimes taking your rehab is going to actually be beneficial, because a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes, especially like recreational jiu-jitsu athletes, they're focusing so much time on the mat. But like when they're doing rehab, now they can maybe focus on their physical capacity development, which might actually be better for their long-term health. So like for me, when one time I had an injury that kind of kept me off the mat, like as opposed to like trying to stay on the mat and be like, I was actually focusing on other things, because when you keep keeping jujitsu, like I want to get back to jujitsu, you're going to class and you're watching. Sometimes that makes you want to do things that you probably shouldn't, versus I have a lot of stuff on my plate. So it allowed me to kind of focus on something else. And then when my body allowed me to go back to jujitsu, I kind of switched gears back to jujitsu.
So, same question, but now instead of a catastrophic injury, let's say it's somebody who's had a nagging injury for 5 to 10 years. It's like it's an injury that won't really go away, and it's bugging them. And maybe as they're aging, they're starting to feel that injury a little bit more. What kind of advice would you give to that person?
I mean, the sooner you can get the injury addressed, the better, right? Because like acute injuries are much easier to manage. Chronic injuries are harder. So one, start actually working on it. Two, because it's a chronic injury, the prognosis, the time is going to take longer. So just be patient. People go to see their physio once and like, I'm not fixed. That's not how physiology works. Like if we're trying to make biological tissue changes, it's like if you lift weights, it's going to take about 6 to 8 weeks to actually see muscle built. Tissue's the same way. That's what healing, 6 to 8 weeks. So you have to be patient with understanding how long it's going to take. As you start going back, we also can do some jujitsu activity modifications. Like let's say someone has a neck injury and they're a big inverter. Like you don't have to invert in jujitsu. Like focus on other things. Like I remember I had a groin injury. And it actually was beneficial as I was coming back. So as I started coming back, I pretty much couldn't do any guard because anytime I would do anything with my leg was weak and it hurt. So it really made me focus on like that control-based pinning game, because like if I got on top, like I couldn't let them scramble. So modifying your jiu-jitsu style will be beneficial, even if it's not like your game. Because sometimes people like they want to just focus on their A game. But ultimately, grapplers should kind of focus on being well-rounded. Like maybe it's outside of what you normally do, but that's not bad.
What is the most dangerous move in jiu-jitsu?
Probably Akane Basami, scissor takedown.
Just due to the unpredictable, uncontrolled falling body weight?
Yeah. I would say uncontrolled falling body weight is going to be where you're going to see a lot of those catastrophic injuries. Because like we could take the heel hook, right? And like, yeah, the heel hook is going to damage the knee. But with tapping and like having good training partners, like I know competition's different where people just they just don't tap to stuff, but that's kind of a lot of cases it's going to be on them. Don't worry, I got cats too. I don't know where they are. I'm surprised they haven't jumped in on me. So I would say like that uncontrolled falling body weights where you're going to see a lot of the really bad injuries. Like in training, man, like it's training. Who cares? Like tap. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But
you can't really control when somebody decides to dive sideways onto your leg, right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm a black belt. Like I'll roll people. Like a blue belt puts me in a heel hook and it's in. Like I tap. Like it's training. Who gives a shit? Like I think that's a big problem. And that's why I actually don't agree with people that have certain techniques banned until certain belt levels. Because like, let's say like now with IBGF, heel hooks are legal in the adult division, brown and black for no-gi. So now people are like, oh, you can't heel hook until brown or black. But the problem is, so now they're going to go to open mat. They roll with a blue belt who's like a heel hook. Like all they do is heel hooks. Well, that purple belt who doesn't know any leg locks is essentially a white belt in heel hooks.
Yes.
So I feel like their ignorance is what's going to cause them to get injured more than the technique itself.
No, I totally agree with that. You said it perfectly. Do you think that guard jumping should be banned?
So this is actually, if someone asked me a question, is there anything that I change if they've changed how someone asked me if I changed my rolling style, and that would be one. So I've jumped guard in MMA fights and stuff because I was a closed guard guy for a long time. I had a lot of success with flying submissions. That is one that I'm kind of getting away from, just because it's just if the person just doesn't respond correctly and you fall on their knee, like that sucks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not really like I've done an MMA fight. Partly was because like I got hit with an overhand and I was rocked, and I was like, I either can try to like wrap them up and not get hit, or I can bring them to the ground, and it worked out for me. I jumped guard and I kind of like let the cobwebs clear, and then I was able to keep fighting and I won the fight. not from the guard, but I was able to kind of sustain to get through. But I just think that jumping guard is just, I don't know. I just think that the tactical benefits not worth the risk. I think a lot of people like in my classes, I just say don't jump guard. I mean, if someone had a competition and like they're a guard jumper, it's still different. But it just, in class, like who cares if you get taken down? Like, you know what I mean? I think that's the big issue. So but also as a martial artist, I don't want to ban a technique because like if you start taking out too many techniques, you're going to take away the combat effectiveness of things.
True.
Even if I don't think, so it's hard, man. That might be one thing that I would say like take out from like beginner intermediates, but advanced, it's kind of, if you're a brown or black belt, you should know how to deal with it.
I agree. And jumping guard is very effective, especially in like IBJJF. It's a good way to get the fight to the close guard. I remember one time I was fighting and a guy jumped guard on me, but he intentionally tried to jump guard around my knee area, like it was like a low guard jump. And I remember stumbling, but luckily like no injuries happened. And then I was just like, you fucker, like I'm going to now, I now have to make you pay for that. Cause that was just totally like, it's kind of disrespectful, right? Like you had said, you're trying to get away from it because there is such a risk to doing it to an opponent. Right. And it's like, do we want to win that way? Is it, usually we don't want to hurt each other even when we're competing, we just want to get the win. And something like that can be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. It's funny. Before you go on, there was a video I just posted maybe a few weeks ago about that situation. A black belt does a low guard jump and the guy, messes up the person's knee. And then the black belt who did the guard jump stands up and acts like they did something like effective, like
celebrates.
Man, like if you hurt, I'm like, come on, man, that's an asshole move. If you're like, yes, they got hurt. Like there was one time I did, it was like an ADCC regional tournament. This was before opens. And I'm going with the dude and I go with a flying armbar. And I had really good success with it. But in the process of the way that he fell, his knee got tweaked. But that was one situation where like essentially like literally I was going for a flying armbar and then, unfortunately the person didn't respond. But if you just jump on someone's knee, like you didn't beat them with technical jiu-jitsu. It was just kind of I don't know.
Do you think, because like I wrestle with this because like you said, I want the combat effectiveness and jumping guard is a legit tactic in jiu-jitsu. I want those things to remain, but at the same time, there is such a high risk of that technique. Do you think that maybe a good answer would be, if you're going to jump guard, you have to jump, it has to be above the knees or it has to be above the waist. Like it has to be a clean guard jump where, you're not, I don't know how they would even do it, but like, I find generally if you jump guard above the hips, it's pretty safe, right? But not to say that it couldn't injure someone, but it's safer than if you were to try to jump around the knees. Do you think that would be like a good rule? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I've jumped guard, it would be like I have the clinch. So I'm like, I have an upper body tie. I think I wonder if a lot of these injuries happen from like more of in gi, where because of like the collar grip, there's like a little bit more distance. So now jiu-jitsu people in general aren't super athletic. So like now you're making them close that distance. I do think that if you get on the hips, you're going to be good. Like that low guard jump is where I think that the injury is going to happen. So I would say if you do like, hip high jump, it's going to be a bit safer. We also could do something too, where, like if we allow guard jumping, we could allow slams. Again, I'm just kind of talking right now, like, because I think that's a big worry is if somebody can jump guard, why should they be able to slam you? Right. And
it's true.
And people like, I said, I did an MMA fight. I jumped guard. What did he do? He slammed me, but like I was it was necessary. Right. So I didn't mind that. That also, like there was, I don't know if you watched the PGF tournament like a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But they had this interesting thing where if somebody could pick you up from the ground, you had to let go of the submission. So it's like, look, if this was a fight, I could slam you on your head. We're going to not do slams, but that means you have to let go of the submission, which I thought was a kind of a cool way to do it. Doesn't answer the guard jumping thing, but it just sometimes, even though like we are doing a fighting art. We don't want to get too far away where it's too unrealistic where, hey, if you do this, like the person could slam you. Because I think it was maybe like a few months ago, there was like 2 UFCs where there were 2 knockouts via slam. They weren't even that high of a slam either.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey guys, like if somebody picks you up, you need to let go because, if they're getting knocked out in like that canvas, if like, that ever happened on something harder, you're going to get seriously injured.
Do you think that when we see a guard jumping injury, is that mostly attributed to the receiver not being in a good stance when they receive the guard jump? Would that be one of the main culprits?
Yeah, I think so. Like, because sometimes as you jump, they step in the process. So now their knee's at a weird angle. So now if they try to catch them, they can't.
Yeah.
There could be too much distance. Like I said, like if people are trying to clear, so they're like not quite ready for it. I've been trying to think about what can the defender do to be a little bit more prepared. A lot of these injuries happen, like a lot of like serious knee injuries happen when the knee's either fully extended or almost fully extended. So even like when I do my takedown practice, I want to make sure I have a good amount of like a knee bend so that there's going to be a little bit more of a buffer so that the knee doesn't get hyperextended, because when your knee's bent, it allows you to kind of like rotate the hips a little bit more. So it might minimize some of these catastrophic injuries.
All right. We're just wrapping this up. Dr. Kickass, what is your favorite thing to do?
Favorite, like what do you mean? In jiu-jitsu or just in general?
What's your favorite thing to do? Favorite activity?
Jiu-jitsu.
Recreational? Yeah?
Jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Hell
very, very good. Gi or no gi?
No gi. You
train in the gi, I assume?
Yeah, so I go on and off. I'm a black belt, so I have to train long enough to get the belt. I'm at a stage where like if I was at a gym that just didn't have a gi, I probably wouldn't put it back on. Like generally, if I go open a mat, I'm just doing no gi. The guy that I'm training with now, he's a 4th degree judo black belt though, so like that's actually making me a little bit more excited to train the gi because I find judo really fun. And like I said, like I'm not a black belt in judo, so it's like it's a whole new world of things that I can get better at. But yeah, for the most part, like if I train like 4 days no gi, 1 day gi.
Nice. What if you had a choice? What would be your last meal?
Ooh, breakfast burrito.
Yeah, with what in it?
Egg, potato, chorizo, and hot sauce.
Wow, you're a cheap date. Okay, last question. What is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear. I'm probably most scared of drowning. I'm not a good swimmer. I don't know if I'm actually as scared of birds, but I'm kind of creeped out by birds. So they're on that. So this is a funny story. My wife wanted me to prove myself to her. So before we got married, I had to pick up a chicken. So to conquer my fear of birds. So there's a video of me hugging a chicken, and then we were able to get married.
But you caught the chicken.
I did, yeah.
So it's kind of like Rocky.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool, man. I mean, that was a great conversation, and I think we'll wrap it up there. So, Mike, can you let the people know where we can find you?
Best place to find me would be on social media. My handle is the word Dr._Kickass. And then from there, you can find all my links to my products and, if people are interested in working with me and from there.
Cool. And we'll, I'll get some links from you. My cat's pissed because I'm kicking her off the desk. I'll get some links and things from you that we can include in the show notes so that people can find you. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
Sure. So I got, actually I have a bunch of products coming out. So this week I'm trying to get this product out called Mat Sanctuary. So it's for jiu-jitsu instructors, how we can keep our students safe. So it would just be a longer topic on some of the things that we discussed today. Talk about warm-ups. What are the positions in jiu-jitsu where we're going to see some of these injuries? Because in my opinion, if we're going to prevent injury, it comes down to awareness, like where the injuries are going to occur. If people are interested in cars, it's going to have a controlled articular rotation routine. So that should be available this weekend if I can finish it today. I have a product with BJJ Fanatics coming out. I'm working with my buddy Eugene. How do I say his name? Sozik. He's the Jiu Jitsu therapist. It's called Mat Return. So it's going to be a product where we talk about some mobility things that we're looking for, some of the stuff that we do before we clear someone to sport. I have a course for any physios who are listening. It's if you're a physio, you want to work with jiu-jitsu athletes, but you don't know. I kind of have a long 10-hour course so I can, you might not be a black belt, but how I can make you as close to a black belt as possible. And then the last, if people are interested in learning about FRS, I do have Kinstretch for Jiu-Jitsu, which is going to be taking this joint practice, specifically how do we make our body resilient for Jiu-Jitsu.
Man, that is so awesome. I'll definitely be checking that out. Mike Piekarski, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time. And for anyone listening who wants to support the show, again, check out the links on the bottom. But the most cost-effective way that you can support the show is just like, share, subscribe, and leave many, many comments. And you can always message me on social media as well. I'm happy to answer any questions and take show ideas. So Dr. Kickass, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. And remember, Everyday Jiu-Jitsu Podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu-Jitsu. We'll see you guys next time.